Today on Satansplain, I'll be reading some listener mail, talking about my recent guest appearance on California Haunts Radio, covering topics such as Satanists joining non-Satanic organizations, and why the Church of Satan does not condone illegal activity. Also a reminder that the Satanic Temple sucks.
Well, it's not Satan worship, it's Satanism. It's embracing the life-enriching things which have traditionally been given the devil's name. Pride, lust, earthly success, rational self-interest, atheism, humor, nonconformity, science, a passion for living, being selective about whom we love. We don't see these as shameful sins, but empowering ideals. And we also recognize the psychological power and fun of symbolism and aesthetics, so we utilize Satan as mythology's most fitting mascot for what we're about.
Satansplain, Satanic Talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M.
Magister Bill M. here with Satansplain. In this episode of Satansplain, I'm mostly just going to read you some of the emails I've received in recent weeks, along with my replies to them, and some of the bigger topics that they may bring up along the way. Before we get to all of that, though, I just want to mention that recently I was a guest on the show California Haunts Radio. Charlotte, the host of the show, had heard me on Coast to Coast AM and really wanted to have me on as a guest on her own show. So she contacted the Church of Satan, gave me the invitation, and I agreed. I thought the interview went well. Usually when I do a video, do a video interview, I have a green screen behind me or a black curtain. Just, it makes for a better presentation. Well, I had my black curtain set up for I had it all set up before the interview was about to begin, and about 30 seconds before we started, it came crashing down. So I was trying to pull it back up, but I said, fuck it, and just went ahead with the interview. Oh well, that's showbiz, I guess. But if you do go to Satansplain.com, you can find a link to that clip. And please go to the actual YouTube clip if you can, and give that clip a like on YouTube. It was streamed on several platforms, and it might be available on Facebook Watch too, I think, because I think it was streamed there. But anyway, you can find the YouTube clip right on Satansplain.com, one of the more recent blog entries. Or just search Satansplain.com for California Haunts Radio, and it should show up. Anyway, thought it went well. One thing I have to say about interviews as a Satanist is that 99% of the time it's just, the Satanism 101 questions that we get asked. And to people who are already Satanists, I know they might, not find that too interesting, but sometimes hearing how different Satanists answer different questions can be interesting. That's what I think. That's why I listen to other Satanists when they're being interviewed. And, there are still the occasional different questions that come up. A couple of them did come up this time. The 30-second description of Satanism that you hear at the beginning of every Satansplain episode, well, that is admittedly an answer I find myself repeating because it's my go-to answer for the question we get asked all the time. What is Satanism? I feel that it's good to have these sorts of things in reserve. Even if you're a Satanist who doesn't give interviews and understandably may not want to talk to most of humanity, I don't blame you, but I think it's good to have a set of answers you can give and, know the refutations you can give to the more stupid questions or accusations that come up often. I should probably do an episode on the art of debate one of these days. We'll see. Anyway, let's get into the email. I have an email here from a listener I was talking to elsewhere on social media, and the conversation was continued through email. He writes, Dear Magister Bill M., I wanted to express my admiration of the Satansplain podcast and your articulate approach. Articulate approach, as I botched the name of the show. Okay. You are by far one of the more coherent representatives of the church, which I appreciate for my own continued learning as well as for referral purposes. Along these lines, just the other day I was messaging with an online acquaintance about his interests in Luciferianism. And to my amazement, this individual had never heard of the Church of Satan. Of course, I directed him to the Church of Satan website, yet I also appreciated him appreciated having been able to refer him to Satansplain episode number 13. I would imagine that in time your efforts will result in an enormous wiki-type knowledge base for the benefit of the public and Satanists alike. I additionally appreciate the manner by which you discuss political viewpoints without intentionally attempting to polarize. I tend to veer a bit politically right on certain issues and left on other issues, and I have actually found it a bit surprising to observe quite a number of online Satanists tending to banter together for or against a political party. I mean, that's fine if they want to do that, but I just do not tend to agree enough with any one group or individual enough to authentically join in on that sort of thing. In fact, I really do not have much in common with Satanists just based on that single factor alone. To clarify, I read the Satanic Bible in 1991 when I was 21 years old. It changed me, though I suppose it has predominantly been a personal experience and not a social one. Yet again, I do appreciate the content you have made available, and I look forward to what you shall produce. So thank you again for that email. I've been asked to withhold the name, so I will. But I wrote back to him, I thanked him, and I said, I'm glad, Satansplain episode number 13 came in handy, the Luciferian thing. And yes, one of my long-term goals, I would say, is to have these episodes available so people can, tell others, no, what you said here is a misconception about Satanism that people make all the time. Here, go listen to this episode of Satansplain where that's dealt with in full. Or they may say, hey, that thing about the Church of Satan or Anton LaVeyan is completely incorrect. Have a listen to this, and then give them a link to a relevant episode. So now, admittedly, people too lazy to research and find the correct answers on their own in the first place may look at a Satansplain link and say, I'm not going to listen to some hour-long podcast. And I realize that is one drawback. I'm sure as time goes on, I'll refine the process and maybe try to find ways to break things down into smaller parts. It's hard to try to be thorough while at the same time not talking for too ridiculously long. I think I said that in episode number 1. I was going to shoot for episodes that were around 20 or 30 minutes, but, well, obviously that did not happen, at least not consistently. Now, as for politics, in my email back to him, I said, yes, politics is definitely a touchy subject, whether you're a Satanist or not. I did a whole episode of Satansplain on politics. I have talked about the topic here and there in other episodes. I've explained that the Church of Satan does not have an official political position, nor would it make any sense to have one. That's because Satanism is a religion of the self, not the collective. It is a tool, not a cause, and Satanists span all sorts of geographic regions, levels of income, ages, family sizes, careers, and so on. So inevitably, we're not going to end up all voting the same. We're not going to end up all having the same exact politics. What's in the best, shamelessly selfish interest of one Satanist may be different for another Satanist. For that matter, there are some Satanists who think voting is a complete waste of time, or maybe they live in countries where voting isn't even an option for citizens. Personally, I am what you would call more right-leaning. This isn't really much of a secret to people who see me ranting on social media, but I use my personal accounts for that sort of stuff, not, the Satansplain accounts or the Satan Bear page, or even my Bill M page on Facebook. My Facebook profile is another story. Speaking of which, if you're on Facebook and you still don't know the difference between a profile and a page and a group, and you refer to all of them as pages, well, you need to stop that. Regardless, the way I see it, Satansplain isn't the place, for me to ramble about any and all political views I have. I set this up as a Satanism podcast, not a political podcast, so I present it as a Satanism podcast, and I acknowledge the reality that not all Satanists share my political views. So when I do talk about something of a, political nature, I try to at least tie things back to, well, this is the Church of Satan's official take on this issue, or point out we don't have an official take on this issue and why. Or I'll say, well, here's a third view of this hot news topic, which nobody seems to be talking about. I felt I did that recently when I was giving my thoughts on Kanye West. So that was my email back to him, and I said, if you have any suggestions for other topics to do on Satansplain, I'm interested in hearing them. He wrote back and said that he is a member of not only the Church of Satan, but also Temple of the Vampire, or Vampire Temple. And he said, hey, maybe you could interview me or some other Temple of the Vampire member to talk about the organization and what it's about. And my reply to him, to put it nicely, was a sort of thanks, but no thanks. Because I'm just going to be completely blunt here. I personally do not like the Temple of the Vampire. I have many friends who are members of the Temple of the Vampire, and I would say that they are one of those organizations that does not inherently contradict Satanism. There's no philosophical conflict, I think, with a Satanist who wants to be in both the Church of Satan and Temple of the Vampire. But even so, I just don't like them. I don't like Temple of the Vampire. I don't support them. I never have. Maybe I'll go into details in another episode of Satansplain one of these days. But for now, I mean, I just put it bluntly, that's where I stand. This does, however, bring up a wider side topic that I think is worth talking about, and that is being a member of the Church of Satan while also being a member of some other organization. So I am going to take a few minutes to Satansplain here about that. First, to be clear, Church of Satan members are allowed to join whatever organizations they want, with what I would say are two exceptions. So one, criminal organizations. You can't be a Church of Satan member and join a criminal organization. This should be obvious because this is a sensible extension of the Church of Satan's general policy of not condoning illegal activity. I'll talk more about this later. But if you're going to be part of some organization doing illegal activity, whether that's organized crime or a street gang or people like Animal Liberation Front, the people who set fire to animal testing labs or bomb whaling ships or whatnot. If you're going to do any of that stuff, we don't want you as a member of the Church of Satan because you're probably not worth the headache. So that's the first category of clubs, which I'd say is understandably off limits, and I'll talk a little more about it later. But second, and equally understandable, I would say, is you cannot join the Church of Satan and also be a member of some group that actively bashes the Church of Satan or tries to present itself as a rival to the Church of Satan or the new form of Satanism. So no, we don't want you if you're going to try to simultaneously join the Temple of Set or the Church of Lucifer or the Satanic Temple or any of these other pseudo-satanic groups that actively tell lies about us, the Church of Satan, or tell lies about Anton LaVeyan, or think there's some kind of evolution of Satanism or a replacement for the Church of Satan. For that matter, actual religious organizations like, some Catholic organization or Brotherhood of Islam, for that matter. I mean, I don't know any Satanist who would want to join groups like that in the first place, so I guess that makes it kind of a non-issue. And, why would you do that anyway? You're just trying to collect memberships out of a hobby or something? But anyway, barring those two things, illegal groups and groups that explicitly bash the Church of Satan or Satanism, the Church of Satan, Church of Satan members are essentially free to join any organization they want. Now, I know some Satanists are going to say, well, as a Satanist, Bill, you see, I'm a non-joiner. I joined the Church of Satan because that's different. It makes sense philosophically. It's not collective. It's not something where I have to interact with other members and do things with them and so on, or sacrifice any part of my personal life or social life or my time for the Church of Satan. Like Anton LaVeyan said, the amusing paradox of an organization for non-joiners. It works. But yeah, I don't know why Satanists would join some other group. Aren't you being conformist, Bill, when you join another group? Well, that's fine if that's your position. There's nothing wrong with that. That's your choice. If you consider yourself a non-joiner, don't want to join anybody else. But for some of us other Church of Satan members, you have to realize that many find personal benefits in joining some other organization. Again, barring those two obvious categories I mentioned. But to give examples, as I said a few episodes ago, I am a member of a college fraternity. I graduated college a long time ago, but I'm still involved as an alumnus. I feel I personally get something out of that. I'm also a member of Mensa, the High IQ Society. I joined that, mainly just out of curiosity to see if I could get in. But once I got in, I found some benefits here and there. And likewise, we have some Church of Satan members who are members of some other organizations, say the American Legion, some who are members of the NRA, or the 4-H Club, or Army Corps of Engineers, or, honors societies, theater groups, the Musicians Union, other work unions. So again, it comes down to the individual Satanist deciding who and what is worth their time, weighing all the commitment with the benefits and deciding if this is something they can benefit from. And that's about it, really. That's really all it comes down to. Not every act of collaboration or group affiliation is automatically herd conformity. So I said I would elaborate a bit on that first category, legal groups, criminal groups. I mentioned the exception of criminal groups, like a mafia group or what have you. Whenever this topic comes up of the Church of Satan not condoning illegal activity, there is usually at least one person in the online conversation who whines about this. Usually, they'll try to make the philosophical argument of, well, Satanism is about being your own god, and you shouldn't be a slave to the government just based on what they say you can and can't do. And Satanism is about self-preservation and indulgence. So if, for example, if you were starving and your only choice was to steal bread in order to survive, then wouldn't the satanic thing to do would be to, break the law? Yeah, I've heard all that shit before. But this is what those people forget. We, the Church of Satan, have gotten so many baseless accusations over the decades, saying that we break the law in some way or another. First, just due to the fact that we're Satanists, we've gotten the accusations that we torture animals, or that we kidnap children, that we eat unbaptized babies, that we have parties where we dish out illegal drugs, and so on and so on. I mean, you see this in the Christian propaganda. And then on top of all that, there are the accusations about what an organization of Satanists would be doing at the organizational level. So we get accused of trying to coordinate all these efforts on a massive scale, be the hub of a network of crimes, like the ones I listed, etc. And I would say these accusations peaked during the Satanic Panic of the 1980s, of course, but we got them before that period, and we still occasionally get some of them today. And on top of all of that, there are crazy people out there who get their misinformation on Satanism from Christians and horror movies and stuff like that, and then style themselves after that. They style themselves after that, and then sometimes approach the Church of Satan and want to join us. To which, of course, we say, no, go away, seek mental help. I don't believe what you're saying, that you are in, you hear the voice of Satan in your head and you worship Satan and you sacrifice animals for them. Okay, you're getting your information of Satanism from Christian propaganda, and you're not a Satanist. Go seek mental help. We don't want you. So when you keep all of that in mind, doesn't it make a lot more sense for the Church of Satan to just simply adopt an official policy of, yeah, we don't condone illegal activity? I mean, are you still thinking that after what I just said, the Church of Satan should instead adopt a policy of, yeah, we think it's okay to break the law in some cases? You really don't see how that would be self-defeating? That it wouldn't only make the Jesus freaks say, aha, this confirms everything we've been saying about Satanists. That it wouldn't also attract the sort of devil worshippers who do those sorts of things, again, listed in the Christian propaganda tracts. That it wouldn't get us extra scrutiny and harassment from law enforcement breathing down our neck. I mean, forget about Satanism for a moment. What organization, satanic or otherwise, would say, oh, we condone illegal activity in some cases? Why would you state that to the public? What could you possibly get out of that? We're going to take a break right now. When we come back, an email I got asking me about the Satanic Temple. Ugh. and also a new Satanacdote to share, so, we will end things on a lighthearted note. Stay tuned.
You are listening to Satansplain, real satanic talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M. For questions, comments, and correspondence, send an email to bill@satansplain.com.
Fundamentalist Christians believe the world is 12,000 years old. And I ask them, how do you think that? Why do you think the world's 12,000 years old? They go, well, we added up all the people born from Adam and Eve, added up their ages, roughly 12,000 years. Well, how scientific. Boom, I can't fucking argue with that kind of, research. You think the world's 12,000 years old? That's right. Okay, can I ask you a question? Sure. It's a one-word question. Fine. Dinosaur. If the world's 12,000 years old and the Bible covers it, why didn't someone bring up fucking dinosaurs? You think someone would have brought that up somewhere in the goddamn book. And Jesus and the disciples walked down the path towards Nazareth, but oh, the trail was blocked by a giant brontosaurus with a splinter in his paw. And the disciples did run a screaming, what a big fucking lizard lord. I'm sure gonna mention this in my book, said Luke. Well, I'm sure gonna mention it in my book, said Matthew. I'm not sure what I saw, said Thomas. Timothy nudged him. It was a big fucking lizard, Thomas. But Jesus was unafraid. And he took the splinter from the brontosaurus' paw, and the brontosaurus became his friend. And Jesus sent him to Scotland, where he lived in a loch, so many years, attracting fat American families with their fat fucking dollars to look for the Loch Ness Monster.
That sacrilegious comedy hors d'oeuvre is from The Devil's Mischief. Listen to The Devil's Mischief on RadioFreeSatan.com.
Magister Bill M. here with Satansplain. Visit the official website for the show, Satansplain.com. That is where you can find all of the episodes to listen to. Satansplain is also available on a number of other platforms, Spotify, YouTube, Audible, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and more. Please give a like and follow to the Satansplain page on Facebook, as well as the Satansplain channel on Twitter. You can also email me, bill@satansplain.com is the email address. Speaking of email, I've got an email here from Bridget. I'm not going to read you the entire thing. It's pretty long, but here's enough of it so that you get the gist of it. Greetings, Magister Bill. I was hoping I might get your thoughts on a controversy in Satanism that I don't yet understand. Too long, didn't read. My question is, why are Satanists mad about the Satanic Temple and Lucian Greaves? Could it be that he's one of the most successful LaVeyan Satanists in history? Let me explain. I am new to LaVeyan philosophy, so please take this question with a grain of salt. My most recent interest in Satanism was reignited by watching the Hail Satan documentary during lockdown. When I heard the 7 tenets, I kind of laughed myself and thought, that's not a religion, that's basic decency. How is that satanic? I had read the Satanic Bible in high school, and I knew those tenets weren't anywhere to be found in its pages. Still, I was intrigued by the aesthetics enough to look into Satanism more, and so glad I did. My first question was, who is this Lucian Greaves guy, and where did he get his philosophy? If he was a Satanist when he founded TST, but he's not in the COS, then where did his Satanism come from? I learned what most Satanists already knew, that he was a Church of Satan Satanist for many years before forming the Satanic Temple. Now, here he is 20 years later, and he started his own branch of Satanism that is breathtakingly dissimilar from LaVeyan's philosophy. Thomas Leroy called it right-hand path Satanism, which sounds a little like a vegan steak. It's almost comical, really, how non-Satanic the Satanic Temple and the 7 tenets are. But I wonder if it's also kind of genius. Let's say Doug had a bee in his bonnet about the Christians in government, and he wanted to use the courts to fuck with them and beat them at their own prayer and school game, but he didn't have the money or the manpower. So, as a good self-interested Satanist and lesser magician, he found an investor, Kevin Soling, crafted some milquetoast tenets, slapped on some occult iconography to put in an untapped market of disaffected loners with a victim mentality and a desire to shock the normies, and he called it a religion. And the email goes on for a few more paragraphs like this. And then later on, I imagine the response might be that he's spreading misinformation about the religion, which is not appreciated. As a devil's advocate, I say, so what? Is he obligated to carry a clear message to the masses to benefit the collective religion of Satanism? Are Satanists constrained by some sort of herd morality about telling the truth, being transparent about intentions, doing what's best for other Satanists, caring about how others perceive them, etc.? Or are Satanists their own gods who make their own rules? What if Lucian had a vision and a goal and he's executing the ever-loving fuck out of it, regardless of what anybody else thinks? Would that not be the most satanic thing to do if these were his motives? This is my question. Of course, if he's still LaVeyan in any sense, he certainly left the Mutual Admiration Society far behind. But I don't think that's why people are angry. And why does anyone hold it against him? Other than envy, I don't get it. So, all right, so that's the gist of Bridget's email. And I'm going to read you my response with a couple of other side points I will throw in along the way. Dear Bridget, well, it's hard to know where to begin with what you emailed me. I see that your name matches up with a Twitter profile of the same name, which I'm assuming is you, and I see that you yourself are a member of the Satanic Temple. Heck, you could be another one of Doug's sock puppet accounts for all I know, but I digress. On a side note for you listeners out there, I've seen some people whine when I refer to Lucian Greaves by his real name, Doug. And they say, why are you referring to him as Doug? Do you think that makes you really clever to call him Doug? And my reply to that is, I call him Doug because that's the name he had when I first met him in person in 2005. That was back when he was still a Church of Satan member, when both him and Shane Bugbee were Church of Satan members and both had shows on Radio Free Satan, as did I. So anyway, continuing with my reply to Bridget. First of all, Bridget, you can drop the term LaVeyan. The phrase LaVeyan Satanism is a redundancy. You see, the name of the religion codified and practiced by Anton LaVey is called Satanism. He was the first person in human history to create an actual religion under that name. Before him, Satanism, usually with a lowercase s, was just an accusatory word that described any sort of blasphemy, not an actual defined ideology. So saying LaVeyan Satanists, well, that phrase kind of implies there are other types of Satanists, but there was absolutely no rational reason to take the label of the religion we established and apply it to completely different belief systems. Likewise, the term theistic Satanists, for example, well, theistic Satanists are just devil worshippers with a vocabulary problem. There is no reason to consider them and us to be two denominations of the same religion, as we clearly aren't. So again, terms like LaVeyan Satanism or traditional Satanism or theistic Satanism, terms it seems were largely pushed by the media and wannabe scholars near the end of the Satanic Panic when journalists wanted to justify being able to call devil worshippers like Richard Ramirez and the like, to call them Satanists. And again, they are not. And before you say it, no, this is not a no True Scotsman fallacy. This is not a case of one denomination of a religion calling all the other denominations fake. It's not like a Protestant who calls Catholics heathens or vice versa. That's because Protestants and Catholics really are still two different denominations of the same religion, that religion being Christianity. And the reason for this is because at the end of the day, despite any differences Protestants and Catholics may have with each other, they still follow the same book. They believe in the same God. They have the same historical origins. They have the same beliefs that distinguish Christianity from all the other religions of the world. And the same simply can't be said about a Satanist like me, somebody who understands and adheres with the Satanic Bible, and some criminally insane murderer like Richard Ramirez. But getting back to the question, there is also absolutely nothing genius or praiseworthy about what Doug Masicko and Kevin Soling are doing. It is not lesser magic. It is parasitic. It is not Satanism. In fact, it's not an ideology clear enough to be considered a religion at all, I would argue. It is delusion on multiple levels. and I'll explain why in a moment. But it is trolling. It is blatant misinformation. Most importantly, their efforts only end up fueling religious zealotry, and they are never successful in their stunts, really, nor can they be, given how innately stupid and self-defeating their approach is. And here in my email back to Bridget, I gave a link to one of the articles from Queer Satanic. Now, Queer Satanic is the group of ex-members of the Satanic Temple who are involved in a lawsuit against them. And to be clear, Queer Satanic has attacked me in the past. They have tweeted things against articles I've written. They have their beef with the Church of Satan, but since then, I've sort of let that stuff slide because I have to admit the research they do and the things they find and expose about the Satanic Temple are quite detailed and damning. And I have spoken to some of them privately, directly. Some of them have asked me for details on the history of Doug and his time on Radio Free Satan, for example, and I've shared some of that. Now, this particular article I sent, which you can find on their website, is titled, "Nothing Works the Way the Satanic Temple Thinks It Does." I will not read through the entire article, but one thing it points out is that the Satanic Temple's general approach has been to look at whatever Christians are doing on public grounds, whether it's a school program, a statue, a nativity scene, or whatever, and then present a satanic parody of it. Well, that sort of fight for inclusivity is not very satanic, I would say, since Satanism is an explicitly adversarial religion. So what is their rationale for doing that sort of stuff? Well, I would say the rationale is, if you do this, then you're beating those theocrats at their own game. You're beating the Christians at their own game. So you can gloat and say, okay, Christians, you wanted religion in public. Well, this is what that allows for, too. And the people who read these clickbait headlines, who don't know any better, get a chuckle out of it. Because people, by far and large, already dislike holy rollers, so naturally, they like reading a headline where it sounds like Christians are getting owned, getting beaten by their own game. So, admittedly, to those of us who likewise have a disgust for Christian zealots and Christian theocracy, stunts like these might sound appealing, again, just on the surface. But, as this article points out, there are several problems with this whole approach. First of all, this whole premise of trying to beat Christians at their own game like this is built upon the notion that Satanists are the bad guys and are viewed in public and viewed by the status quo as the bad guys. And frankly, yeah, that's the way it is, and that's kind of the way it should be. That's kind of the point. Satan means the adversary, and we are adversaries to spirituality. We are not trying to gain society's acceptance. We reject the herd. We reject spirituality. We focus on the self and are busy doing our own things with our own lives. There are still the people who incorrectly believe we sacrifice goats and eat unbaptized babies and all that, and I do think misinformation like that needs to be corrected now and then. But again, the idea of these pranks where, oh, look, the Christians said they wanted religion in public, and it backfired because, look, according to this clickbait article I found, the devil worshiper showed up, ha ha ha. And, what happens from there is the readers say, well, that's pretty bad. I mean, nobody wants them, those devil worshippers. Nobody likes them. They're the bad guys. But anyway, let's see what the next clickbait post is in my social media feed. Now, for those of us who are Satanists, who are just trying to live our lives without unnecessary attention from Christians and other people who'd want to give us a hard time, this is bad. More importantly, the approach doesn't work. And the article here from Queer Satanic points out two specific reasons as to why. First of all, this game of, ha, you're a hypocrite, does not work against religious zealots. Never mind the fact that it can't work in a society you believe to be dominated by Christian thinkers and enforcers. You see, you can't trick zealots into working against their own interests with that game. The expectation is that Christians will see these stunts and say, oh, well, golly gee, I guess by pushing for my religion in public, I've opened things up to problems because Satanists are now showing up and doing what I'm doing. Golly gee, I never really thought of the consequences of asking for more religion in public. I guess I better tone things down a bit and think about the error of my ways. No, that is not going to happen. No holy roller is going to think that. No holy roller is going to say that. See the satanic sin of solipsism. In fact, if anything, holy rollers are going to do the opposite. They'll point to these people masquerading in the black cloaks and say, see, we have literal Satanists infiltrating the school. Literal devil worshippers. We have these people showing up to government meetings and school meetings and next to our Jesus statues and demanding equal time, literally in the name of Satan. Prayers literally in the name of Satan. School classes literally in the name of Satan. Abortion defended literally in the name of Satan. This just proves what we've been saying all along, that Satan is real and his minions are really after us and our children. So we're going to have to double down in our efforts because obviously we need to push for the power of Jesus more than ever before. So that's one reason why this doesn't work. You're accomplishing attention-seeking. You're accomplishing a false sense of purpose to the people looking for an excuse to freak out the holy rollers. Get a, temporary thrill from that. And yeah, I guess you're succeeding in giving atheist readers a chuckle for 10 seconds when they scroll through their news feed on their phones and catch a clickbait headline like that. But that's really all that accomplishes. The second problem, which the article points out, is that simply, quote, the Satanic Temple really, really sucks at law. And as you can imagine, the people who read their headline stories and the clickbait news usually don't understand law either. Legally, things like trying to allow for abortion under the idea of it being a satanic sacrament, for example, does not hold up in the courts. And they may try to blame this on the courts being biased in favoring Christians, but at the same time, the Satanic Temple predicates their own actions on the idea that the same courts will see their brilliance and rule in the Satanic Temple's favor. Again, all this while trying to say, look, we're the bad guys, we're Satanists, but we're the good guys too. Anyway, that's some of what that great article covers. Continuing on with my email response to Bridget, I told her, you are also conflating a number of different events in the Satanic Temple's crooked history and ignoring things which have happened in between. Their shtick started off as a public trolling stunt for what was going to be one of Kevin Solling's silly documentaries. They hired actors and claimed to believe in a literal Satan, and shortly after they tried to turn it into some sort of serious thing. Brian Werner was the high priest. He seems to understand the Satanic Bible, though I would say he completely misses the boat when he thinks Satanists need to rise up as a collective and demand social acceptance. I already explained why that doesn't make any sense. But anyway, he quit the Satanic Temple once he had realized it was full of clueless people. You can find his video testimony on YouTube, so go look that up. You don't have to take my word for it. And as I recall, Jex then came in. Jex, forget her last name, but she seems to be responsible for taking it in the equally absurd social justice warrior direction that persists to this day. And she herself quit the Satanic Temple a few years ago. Regardless, it was only after they were attempting to protest a Ten Commandments monument that they came up with these 7 tenets, which was after all the events I said. As you point out, these 7 platitudes, Bridget, have nothing to do with Satanism. The idea was to come up with a list with more mass appeal than the 10 Commandments, which is hardly a challenge. But more specifically, the hope was to watch Christians attack the list so that Satanic Temple could sit back and say, oh, so what are you saying? That, you're against things like empathy for all? Interesting. You're against this list of wonderful things we wrote up. Or, likewise hope that other people would look at the 2 lists, the 7 tenets and the 10 Commandments, and say, gee, I like this one, the 7 one, much more than, this outdated list that says things like, having no gods before me and blah, blah, blah. Of course, to construct a list with the goal of being highly agreeable to the masses is about as unsatanic as it gets. We are not a religion for the masses. We're just the opposite. Anyway, regardless, that 10 Commandments monument was already settled by the ACLU without needing any help at all from the Satanic Temple. So yeah, the 7 tenets were a list that was composed to fight a battle that was already won before they showed up. And the fact that people join the Satanic Temple because they say they liked the 7 tenets they found online and actually believe it's some kind of Satanism, I think is hilarious, because you're just buying into your organization's own prank. Now, Bridget, further down in your email, you try to rationalize Satanic Temple's spreading of misinformation with the false dichotomy of, quote, are Satanists constrained by some sort of herd morality about telling the truth, or are Satanists their own gods who make their own rules? Well, first of all, Satanism is not just anything anybody wants it to be. You are not simply free to have just about any sort of religious belief or do any action whatsoever and still call it Satanism. Granted, you can have 2 different Satanists who manifest Satanism in their lives in different ways, who may find themselves focusing more on one part and not the other part as they apply Satanism in their lives in, some slightly different ways, but there is still enough structure to Satanism such that we can draw a line in some cases and say, okay, this is Satanism and this is something that's not Satanism. If there wasn't any way to define Satanism enough to distinguish Satanism from non-Satanism, then the term would be useless. Also, the fact that I'm a Satanist means that when people are misrepresenting Satanism, then they are in effect misrepresenting me, something I've mentioned here on Satansplain before. And I'm not going to just passively roll over when that happens. And when I say the Satanic Temple aren't Satanists, as I've already explained, this is not a case of somebody from one denomination of religion denouncing a different denomination of the same religion. I've already explained earlier why that's not the case. But there really is no theological reason to consider the Church of Satan and Kevin Solling's political stunt group to be 2 different denominations of the same religion. The Satanic Temple doesn't even have a clear religion, I would say, by whatever name they're going to call it. They have a list of 7 platitudes. They have some stunts they do for the media, but that's it. I mean, I don't see what they have structure-wise that would make it a religion. What little they do have is even so different from what the Church of Satan has established that, again, there is no valid reason to call them a denomination of the same thing. I mean, just look at where things contradict on a fundamental level. Satanism puts the individual above the collective. Satanic Temple does just the opposite. Satanic Temple says empathy for all. Satanism says kindness to those who deserve it. Satanic Temple says you don't even have to consider yourself a Satanist to be one of them. And they have plenty of members on record who don't identify as even being Satanists in the first place. So what are these 7 tenets and all that crap really describing? Satan means the adversary. We are an adversarial religion, as I say over and over again. Satanic Temple, with their 7 tenets and other actions, are trying to make everything palatable to the masses. Satanism has meritocracy. Satanic Temple preaches egalitarianism. Satanism abhors martyrs. Satanic Temple's whole aim is to play the victim card. If they were really all about social justice and empathy and philanthropy and stuff like that they claim, then they wouldn't do things with the Satan name. They would realize how self-defeating that is. But they don't do that. They want to keep the name for the hope of, triggering Christians and getting them mad so that they can play the injured party. We want a secular society, and they want quote-unquote Satanism, or at least, a caricature of what they want to call Satanism, injected everywhere like Christians do with Christianity. I can go on and on, but the bottom line is the Satanic Temple is precisely what they claim to fight against. They are a tax-exempt religious organization, always trying to insert religion into state, raising money off of manufactured fears, and not delivering on promises. So, no, Bridget, my abhorrence of Kevin and Doug's political stunt group is not based on envy. I'm not envious of a group that is completely misrepresenting my religion and, by extension, me. Now, my abhorrence of them is based, among other things, on my abhorrence of people who would go out of their way to misrepresent me in multiple ways, and who would add to the world's problems, which they think they're stupidly helping. So anyway, that concludes my email reply back to Bridget. I will add though, that once in a great while I see somebody trying to make these same kind of arguments about Jesus. You know, I'll see somebody on a Satanism forum once every year or so say, hey, you know, when you think about it, wasn't Jesus kind of satanic? I mean, he was a rebel and a nonconformist. No, Jesus is not a satanic figure. I shouldn't have to say this, but he wasn't. And it's not just because of Christianity's God versus Satan duality mythos. As a Satanist, I can say that Jesus, assuming he ever existed in the first place, is not some sort of admirable character from a satanic perspective. I mean, have you read the Gospels? This is a guy who said, again, assuming he existed, a guy who said to give away all your money, gouge out your eyeball if you look at a human and get horny, love your enemies, which is as absurd as it gets. He yelled at fig trees, and we're told we're supposed to praise him because he was a masochist, essentially. So no, doesn't work with Jesus either. I do suspect Doug and his fan club have a savior complex, but I digress. Well, enough about all of them. Let us switch gears and finish on a more lighthearted note. Let us hear a Satanacdote. Two things I want to quickly point out about this Satanacdote. First of all, I'm going to withhold the name. You'll understand why when you hear it. It's a privacy thing. Second of all, I know a lot of the Satanacdotes you listeners have been sending my way have been about run-ins with holy rollers, and that's fine. They're still good stories, still good Satanacdotes, but I would just like to remind people that these aren't the only forms of Satanacdotes. You can send in other ones, other personal stories involving Satanism in some way or another. So think about it. If you got a good one, email me. bill@satansplain.com is the email address. And with that, let us cue the Satanacdote theme song.
Satanic anecdotes. Satanacdotes.
This listener writes in to say the following. I am a member of the board of directors in a very conservative environment. Our organization is directly linked to the royal family in my country. I have always tucked in the Baphomet, since it would be counterproductive for my career to display any symbols. I do fully agree on the comment you had on the California Haunts interview that neither religion or politics has a place in the work environment. But since I'm in a very conservative environment, it means shirt and tie and no satanic displays whatsoever in the workplace. Recently, I helped a colleague lift an item, and my tucked-in Baphomet medallion necklace fell out of my shirt. He saw it. I looked at him and said, "Let's not talk about this." He said, "Well, I'm gay. Let's not talk about that either." So thank you again for that Satanacdote. Let us end things there. Thank you for listening to Satansplain. Until next time, hail Satan. You have been listening to Satansplain. If you have enjoyed this episode, please give it a like and subscribe where available. For more information on the show, visit Satansplain.com. And to learn more about Satanism itself, visit churchofsatan.com. This episode, copyright 2022, Magister Bill M.